fabulous. But our relationship can change and develop. If that's to happen, there are things that we have to do. One of them is that we must communicate. Communication helps develop intimacy. Talking about our sex life can be difficult because it's a deeply private area of our life, and it requires us to be vulnerable with each other. We want to reassure you this evening that if you make a start, even a small one, saying what you need to say, it can be a beginning of a process that eventually becomes easier.
So good communication enables us to understand each other better. It just helps us understand what the differences are between men and women. The differences in our upbringing, our families, as we grew up. And I think this is an area that we really talked about. One of the books, we don't have that books, but we talked about the differences between men and women a couple of sessions ago. But at the risk of generalizing, the differences can be summed up like this, and these really are pretty general. Men focus on sex, women focus on romance. Men are thinking about the destination, women are thinking about the road. Men are like microwaves. We heat up really fast. We cool down really fast too. Women are like crock pots. They take time to heat up and much longer to cool down. So it may seem like we're incompatible, but our differences were created by God to really enhance the relationship that we have. And we need to celebrate those differences, not make fun of them or jest our spouse, but it really becomes knowing about each other and knowing what's taking place. So that's why communication is crucial. We're all different, not just as men as women, but as people. Some of us reverse the stereotypes. Sometimes a woman wants to make love more often than her husband, or it's not just the husband thing. So Teresa and I have been through all of those cycles. So, and I know that a lot of you have as well. We come into marriage with different expectations and approaches towards sex. For some people, it's just in the bedroom. With us being empty nesters, the whole house is ours. I mean, our kids will say, "Get a room," and we're like, "Leave." The whole house is a room. So anyway, but our daughter's going to be back here in a couple weeks, so that's going to be.
So her comment to us was, "Would you just please make sure you walk around with clothes on?"
Yeah, there you go. We will differ in what we like our husband or our wife to do to arouse us. I think both men and women find it hard to ask each other, "What would you like me to do for you?" It could be shyness or pride, or we think we know everything there is to know about our spouse. So rather than just the trial and error, just ask. And I know for guys, it's hard to stop and ask for directions. But this is a place you need to stop and ask for directions, guys.
And one of the things that we would encourage also, which is a great book, sometimes we have to be honest. Sometimes we don't know our bodies as well as we should. And so that makes us a little leery to communicate because we may not want to feel stupid or dumb. This book, Intended for Pleasure, written by a Christian doctor and his wife, is Sex Technique and Sexual Fulfillment in Christian Marriage. This is an incredible book. There is so much in here. They talk about the human body, each one of us as a man and a woman. And this is a book that if we often know a couple who's getting married very well, we will give them this book because it's just an incredible book, an incredible resource.
And and we always talk about a lot of books. We try and put the books out that are specific to each topic that we're talking about. And these aren't from the 24 Road bookstore. They're from the 24 and a half Road bookstore right up here. So
well, and I have to laugh.
If we don't have them, we can get it for you.
Because we always, when we go to the bookshelf in marriage ministry, Daisy, it's kind of a joke because there's probably at least half the books, if not more, in there on sex. And so we probably have more books in our library in marriage ministry on sex than Barnes & Noble does and the Christian bookstore all combined together on Christian sex.
But it's interesting because I was in Columbus about a month ago and at a church that's literally about 5 times bigger than we are. And their bookstore is about 4 times bigger than our bookstore is. And they had 4 books on marriage in the bookstore. That was it. So you can see it really is a value that Canyon View really places a high value on marriages. So. And
the really awesome part is that a lot of those books relate to different stages that we're in our sexual relationship and in our life. So that's what makes them diverse for all of us, because we all go through different stages. One of the new books that just came out by the Rosbergs, they did the 5 love needs of men and women. Incredible book. Now they have done the 5 sex needs of men and women. It's a great book. They talk about those 5 needs of each of us. And when you know what those are, you know how to relate to your spouse and to meet their needs. If you have children, the early years are a particularly important time to communicate your feelings about sex to one another, both when a wife is pregnant and after the baby is born. This is often a time where sex can be neglected, and it can be the start of a slippery slope. This is an article in a woman's magazine entitled "Couples Who Live Without Sex" quoted a wife called Sarah, who'd been married for 6 years and had 2 children. After Charlie was born, this was their second child, "We didn't have sex for months, and I found it hard to get interested again. You get so tired. I was up every night feeding Charlie. Sex felt more like a chore than a great mutual adventure." And when you look at that, a lot of that could be, taken care of if she would communicate how she feels, and she had a husband who was understanding about where she was and how she felt. If we fail to talk about our feelings, misunderstandings take over, and then what does that do? It leads to isolation and separation. And when those 2 things start, we begin to lose intimacy. We start to not feel attracted to our spouse. We don't want to be around them. They become an irritant to us. And I'm sure all of us have been there. As we talk, we can help each other and be sensitive to each other, especially when we're having problems. Every couple, except maybe 1 or 2 in the entire universe, have sexual problems at some point in your marriage. Anyone who tells you otherwise is misleading you. It's just the circle of life that we go through, the ups and downs.
Okay, so now guys, I've got some good news and some bad news for you. The bad news is at some point in time, every guy in here, you're either going to suffer from impotence, premature ejaculation, or delayed ejaculation. And it's going to happen, whether it's a health thing or an age thing. But the good news is there's ways to work around those. And again, this becomes a communication thing. You need to be letting your wife know if you're having a problem. And it's not always the little blue pill that's going to solve the problem. God plays a bigger role than that. So Psalm 34:19 says, "A righteous man may have many problems, but the Lord delivers him from them all." So
and the other thing you have to think about is when we go through those different stages, there may be things that are actually physically wrong with us. And if we choose to ignore them, and because we don't want to communicate about them, then the only person we're hurting is ourselves, because we can't give to our spouse what they need. And, I'll speak from experience as a woman who is going through the early part of menopause. Hormones play an incredible role for women. And I've had to learn that. When I had certain symptoms come, I couldn't just ignore them and act like they'd go away or don't deal with them. I went to the doctor, found out why, and, in taking bioidentical hormones, I have gotten through a whole bunch of the issues with, health that I would never have done if I had just ignored them or been too afraid to talk to Les about them. Ladies, we're going to talk about arousal. This is a very complex issue. Medical statistics show that 99% of women are physically able to achieve an orgasm. And yet, many women are not experiencing them or rarely doing so. Now, there are many reasons for that. As women, being emotionally understood will be a crucial part of experiencing fulfillment in an orgasm. We talked about this earlier. When we create an absolute value environment, we feel safe there. So our bodies respond appropriately. Okay? One thing I would encourage you ladies is don't fake an orgasm. I mean, it's okay if you don't have one every time, but you know what? It's okay to communicate to your husband how you feel about that, if it's something that is hindering your sexual relationship. So again, it sounds like something you may not want to talk about or communicate, but it's so important, because if we don't, we cannot sexually be satisfied with each other. And if we're doing what God asks us to, and that's sacrifice ourselves on behalf of our spouse, then we've got to be able to communicate what's going on in our heart and in our mind and how we feel. So, don't get wrapped up in the statistics. And I kind of like to look at it as the big O is really not orgasm, it's oneness. So we don't experience orgasm every time. It's how the oneness is with our spouse. Was that a loving experience that we shared with each other? That's what we have to ask. Was it contributing to our oneness? When this becomes the case, we often find our body responding appropriately. Fear is one of the greatest barriers to sexual fulfillment. It takes courage and trust to bring our fears out in the open and talk about them. But as we do, we can move forward. And marriage is designed as the lifelong relationship of understanding each other better and better. So we have to communicate, even about sex. We don't always get sex right. And you know what? Sometimes the best antidote for not getting sex right is laughing. It stops the intensity of it. I mean, when you're so wrapped up in it. And one of my favorite stories that Les and I laugh about are when we went to his brother's house.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And, I mean, so, you go to family's house and you're like, sometimes you're in the mood to risk it, maybe to have sex when you're at your family's house. Sometimes you're not.
We're on the same end of the house that our little niece's room is on the same end.
And so we are up there for graduation. Everybody gets ready to go to bed, and we get ready to go to bed, and we both sit on the bed.
No, you were in bed.
Oh, was
I plopped.
Oh, that's right. He plopped down on the bed, and boom, the mattress just went to the floor. And both of us looked at each other and went, "Oh my gosh, what's your brother thinking? What is he thinking we're doing in here?" Well, the board slats underneath were not in the right place, and so of course the way.
And he knew all about it. They knew all about it.
Well, and so
neglected to tell us.
Yeah. So it was like the joke the next morning, and because we're not afraid to talk about it, we're like, "Did you guys hear some noise last night?"
The bed break.
The bed break. So oh my gosh. So now, guess what we do? We look under the mattress and make sure the slats in the bed are all okay and they're not on the edge anymore.
Whether we're at my brother's or someplace else.
So if we decide to risk it, we're not going to really get in trouble.
Okay, so we spent quite a bit of time on communication. The next area is the importance of tenderness. It's been said that physically it can take a man 7 seconds to have sex. A man can be ready any time, any place, but God's rigged it. A man cannot be a good lover unless he's helped with the dishes, filled the car with gas, taken out the trash, and been sensitive towards his wife's needs. So here's a diagram, and this diagram is not in your book, but I love it. Take a look at the man switch. On, off. Now look at the ladies. If you can figure out which dial to turn, you're ahead. There's no switch on there at all for the women. There's just, I'm like, oh my gosh. So.
And it changes every time.
It changes every time. That's exactly right. Just when you think you have the rules all figured out, they change.
Right.
So.
That's God's way of making you communicate.
So in this section, I'm going to speak mostly to you guys. But the first thing we need to learn about sex is that it's about giving. It's not about receiving. In our culture, sex has become self-oriented. It's about how can I satisfy my desires? How can I obtain maximum pleasure for myself? It's not about the spouse. And it should be. Good sex is not about mechanics and techniques. It's not about how often and How often can I bring my wife to orgasm or to myself? According to the Bible, sex is about giving ourselves to each other. And that's really what it comes down to. As men, we have to learn and relearn the need to give emotionally first. And that's something that really takes time. If that's something that you haven't done, that's something that you really need to start spending the time doing. It's back on the intimacy equation. For a woman to give herself, excuse me, she must feel safe, loved and special, and conflict must first be resolved. So, if you can't do that, if you can't create the environment whereby they feel secure, it's not going to happen, guys, and it just isn't going to work. If we were to ask what's the most important attribute for a man to be a good lover, the best answer would be tenderness. At some Jewish weddings, the man gives the bride not a ring, but takes off his coat and puts it over his wife as a sign of his promise to protect her. The opposite of protection and tenderness is violence. And there's a recent article indicated that 1 in 4 women suffers some form of domestic violence. And doubtless some of that takes place in the bedroom. Guys, we've got to create an environment that's very safe for our wives. And we've got to work hard at doing that. And I know that it's oftentimes it's not easy. The bedroom should be a place where a woman knows here she will be treated tenderly, here she will be loved, here she will be cherished by a man who knows her like no other. Tenderness means taking time to tune into our wife's emotional needs, not our emotional needs. Really finding out how her day went, what her week's been like. Teresa and I have been married for 22 years, together for 23 years. And trust me, on Saturday, when it didn't take rocket science for me to realize that she was in one of her down cycles. And I'm like, okay, we've got some things to work on here. She probably recognized it just because of where she was at, but that comes from really taking the time to know where our spouse is at and what they really need from us. Tenderness means being tender with our words and our actions. There's a strong link between building each other's self-esteem and building an intimate sexual relationship, especially for women. And self-esteem is so huge for women. For each other's sakes, we need to take care of our bodies. This is something that Teresa's on me all the time. And when I was coaching forever, it tended to not be such an issue. I stayed in pretty good shape. But she's always like, okay, we need to start working out. We need to do this and that. So for her, that's an issue. She wants me to be around for a while. So taking care of ourselves is huge. But we must make it a rule never to criticize our wife's natural shape. Guys, you can't be critical about the way your wife looks. You've got to find the right time and the right place to do things. One of the things you'd never want to do is compare her body to the current fashion, or to a fashion model, or to someone in a restaurant. Statistically, only 1% of women are physically able to have a figure like supermodels. So I thought that was pretty interesting. That's a really low percentage. So guys, be happy with what you've got. As we make love tenderly and passionately, when we make our wife more beautiful, because when someone knows they're loved, it brings out the inner beauty. And there's a story, if I had time I'd share that, but it's about this, it takes place on a Fiji island, and it had to do with how beautiful a man was able to make his wife by how many cows he paid the father for her. And he gave more cows than any other woman had been given than any other father had received cows for before. So it really is a pretty cool story. Tenderness also involves being tender with touch. And this is, for me, this was something that I really had to learn. It's really about increasing non-sexual touching, holding hands, an arm around the shoulder, a hug, brushing each other as you pass. And for me, Teresa was always wanting to hold my hand. I'm like, what are you doing? I'm like, this isn't for me.
Well, and part of that really has to do with your love language. If you've ever gone through love languages and picked out what your love language is, my number one love language is physical touch.
Right.
So for me, it's critical, it's important. I mean, I can even be in the kitchen and he'll be across the room and I will just come over there, even if it's just to put my hand on his shoulder. It's just my love language, and that makes it even more important.
Right. So if a man, and the one thing that if a man only touches his wife when he wants sex, that really sends some pretty bad signals to your spouse. And it can lead to where your wife actually doesn't want to have any contact, and it's pretty tough to have sex if you're not having contact. So.
Yep. The third one is the importance of responsiveness. I want to talk particularly to women on this point. The Bible speaks of a woman's sexuality as being like a garden. The Song of Songs, if you've ever read it, is full of rich poetic imagery describing sexual intimacy. At one point, the husband says, "You are a garden locked up, my bride. You are a lovely orchard bearing precious fruit. You are a garden fountain, a well of living water." The art of a garden is to create curiosity. It is in this sense that the Song of Songs uses a garden as a picture of a wife's sexuality. There is enough to discover and delight in over a lifetime. And as wives, we have the choice whether or not to explore the garden together with our husbands. That's the imagery in the Song of Songs. The wife says, "Let my lover come into his garden and taste its choice fruits." It's as though we as wives hold the key. So this is always my fun visual. If you've ever read Song of Solomon, he talks about pomegranates. So every time I go into the grocery store now, I never look at a pomegranate the same. Because there's a part of my body that's described as a pomegranate. So, I mean, if you've never read the Song of Songs, I would encourage you. I mean, it is, as far as I'm concerned, it's God's version of very in-depth sexual intimacy. And it's amazing. That invitation from the wife in the Song of Songs speaks of a confidence in her own sexuality and the expectation of enjoying complete sexual fulfillment. It presupposes that as women, we believe in the positive nature of our own sexuality. It is a gift, a good gift that we need to give to our husbands. It also requires that climate of trust we talked about. Trust is the bedrock of a good sexual relationship. Trust creates safety, and we talked about that earlier. If there has been hurt through insensitivity or unfaithfulness, then we need to go back to the tools we used in session 4. Talking, apologize, forgiving, rebuilding trust. Takes time. Takes courage. And sometimes that requires outside help, especially if you've ever been through an affair, infidelity. And we've walked that road with people as we've mentored them. Unfaithfulness is a devastating blow to a marriage, but we've watched marriages recover from it. God can take you through anything. If it is hard for us to trust as a result of our past, we too will need support from our husband or wife, their gentleness, their patience, and again, maybe outside help. Again, this was a big issue for Les and I. There were things from our past that were baggage for me, and if I had not talked about them, communicated about them, we wouldn't have got to where we are now. And finally, in the Song of Songs, the wife tells her husband how attractive she finds him. She takes the initiative and she says, "Let us go early to the vineyard. There I will give you my love. At our door is every delicacy that I have stored up for you, my lover." Oh my gosh, this woman is amazing. Being responsive through propositioning our husband or taking the initiative can have an amazing effect on him. It will make most husbands very keen to come home early. And so we kind of have some stuff here that we kind of want to show you a little bit of. Some of the things that Les and I do that kind of, bring that excitement into our relationship. One of our fun things to do is we have a picnic basket, and when we like to go to a bed and breakfast, I will fill the picnic basket with all kinds of goodies, and one of my favorites is chocolate-covered strawberries. And we'll take a bottle of wine in our wine glasses, and we will just camp on the bed, lay a tablecloth out on the top of the bed, and we will just have a picnic, our own little picnic, and just talk and have a great time. Candles. I love candles. So this is always a big one for me. If Les comes home and the candle's lit all over the house and this is on the bed, I think he pretty much gets the message.
This This is our tonight, not tonight pillow. It's
Pretty
also an
straightforward.
It's also effective nonverbal communication tool, guys. I mean, you only have to know 2 words, either tonight or not tonight.
Yep. So that's my favorite pillow I've given him. Another thing I would encourage you ladies is, especially this time of year, we love our flannels. I know we do. Because this is my flannel and they're so warm. But you know what? My husband likes